It's Sunday, April 13, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is serving his third term representing the Massachusetts 4th District after graduating from Harvard. He joined the Marines. He commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. He sits on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and last week called out the arrogance of the bros that have descended upon Washington, D.C., attacking science and undercutting scientists. Congressman Jake Auchincloss, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Anthony, thanks for having me on.
We have so much to talk about, so we'll kind of dive straight in. I want to obviously talk about the tariffs that have turned the world on its head, that Donald Trump, with his random number generator is enjoying the pleasures of. But let's start with health. You have a particular interest in this because the committee you sit on extends to health. You've been pretty critical of the anti-vax conspiracy theorist who now insanely heads up the Department of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. This in light of the measles outbreak that we're seeing in Texas. Just tell me, first of all, how important this is at this moment and maybe why he is the wrong man for the job.
You're right that I'm laser focused on this. It's professional in that I am on the health subcommittee that has jurisdiction over RFK. It's also personal. I grew up in a family of medical scientists. My mom, my dad were both physician scientists who studied cancer and diabetes. And I represent a district in the suburbs of Boston of healthcare professionals, physicians, scientists, nurses, public health officials who have dedicated their careers to eradicating disease. And so I bring all of my constituents, I bring my family, I bring myself to this work. And what we are grappling with in Health and Human Services today is a toxic brew of incompetence, conspiracy, and corruption, starting with RFK himself. This is a man who in 2019 traveled to Samoa as part of his anti-vax roadshow, and he derailed their measles vaccination drive. He did so by pumping propaganda onto their social media networks. The result, predictably, was a measles outbreak. 83 individuals died. The majority of them were children. And when pressed upon his role in that, RFK simply said, quote, "It was a natural experiment, a natural experiment." He's now trying to run that same natural experiment in Texas. Texas has a measles outbreak. And instead of recommending to parents that they vaccinate their children with the MMR vaccine, the safest and most effective vaccine in history, he shipped vitamin A to Texas. Well, kids got vitamin A poisoning, but they also got measles. And that type of incompetence and conspiracy is going to cost children's lives from a disease that was declared eradicated in the United States in the year 2000. I mean, this politician is bringing back a disease that scientists had cured.
505 cases reported as of this week. The state expanded number of counties in the outbreak area to 10. Highly contagious now. There is concern that it has now spread to Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, Mexico.
Yeah. Measles is highly contagious. Generally, epidemiologists recommend that 95% of a population needs to be immunized in order for you to have herd immunity. That's a very high threshold. It requires basically every parent to get their child vaccinated because there are 5% who have medical exemptions and thereby the other 95% need to opt in. What RFK is doing is he's fusing his own personal brand on social media with the organs of state power to dissuade parents of the safety and efficacy of the MMR vaccine. And that is going to lower herd immunity thresholds, and it will lead to more measles outbreaks. Now, he's doing this under the guise of this self-righteous campaign against chronic disease. And here is where I think the arrogance really is stifling. These RFK and Maha bros who have come to Washington, D.C. act as though they're the first individuals to ever discover that junk food is bad for you, that exercise is good for you, that you should sleep 8 hours a night. And they act as though they're some oracles of wisdom because of this, and that it excuses their corruption. And I use that word deliberately because the individuals and special advisors who have amassed around RFK all run private businesses that are regulated by HHS. They are in the position of hiring, firing, and influencing the career civil servants who regulate and reimburse their own businesses. Individuals like Brad Smith, like Callie Means, are self-dealing.
2 children have died. RFK Jr. himself attended a funeral in Seminole a couple of days ago. The children, all of those, the majority of those who are suffering the measles virus are unvaccinated. This goes back to politics pre-RFK Jr. getting his appointment. He's been pushing this anti-vax conspiracy for an awfully long time.
Yes.
And invariably the people that tend to follow him are MAGA Republicans and people who, libertarians, people sit on the right who, disagree with governance of any sort in this area of healthcare. I mean, it's about people that refuse to wear masks,
Anthony,
right?
What's interesting actually is it's got more horseshoe appeal than that.
Right.
It's not only the conservative, trustful element of the MAGA base that does not trust government institutions. Actually, there is a significant following on the left. There is a significant following amongst unenrolled or independent voters. RFK and his agenda have widespread populist appeal. And I think that the project for Democrats and for those of us who believe in science is to sail to windward of that agenda and to capture what is righteous about it, but from a science-driven perspective. And what I mean by that is, yes, we absolutely have a chronic disease problem in this country, diabetes, potential chronic disease drivers of Alzheimer's disease, obesity, sleep apnea. I mean, we can go on here. And yes, it is true that our healthcare system is too oriented towards the billing code and not towards holistic health. And yes, it is true that big food does pump highly processed beverages and food, particularly onto kids, in a way that leads to unhealthy eating habits. We can tackle all of those things. And in fact, I've got specific policy proposals that could appeal to MAHA lawmakers. But what we can't do is approach policy from a position of conspiracy and quackery. It always needs to follow the science.
I mean, the MMR vaccine is something that should be just part of your child's early life. It's a requirement of attending public school. It's one of these things that hopefully parents are understand, but only if the information is there and if the conspiracy theorists aren't standing in the way. So what you're saying is this transcends politics effectively, and this is maybe a messaging issue for successive governments.
Without doubt. RFK is putting forward a false choice to Americans that somehow taking chronic disease seriously requires that we give up the progress we've made on infectious disease. And for the life of me, I don't understand why that has to be the case. Can we have healthier school lunches? Absolutely. Michelle Obama was talking about that 15 years ago. I seem to recall the Republicans saying, don't touch my French fries at the time, but glad that they've caught up to her. Why do we have to also give kids measles while we're giving them healthier school lunches? I feel like we can do both as a country and should. And that is going to be the project for Democrats, I think, is to grapple with chronic disease in a way that feels more compelling and resonant to the electorate while still always grounding it in science and retaining the progress we've made on infectious disease.
The theme that we're kind of getting through this Trump regime is the failure to recognize expertise and doing away with anybody. We've seen this with cabinet appointments, right? Just people who have no knowledge or experience of the areas they're heading up, including in the military.
Yes.
How big of a problem is that?
That is one manifestation of what I think is the deeper theme behind Trump's second term, which is that it is not actually about policy and it's not even about politics. It's about culture. The worldview of MAGA, and best exposited by J.D. Vance, is that across Western civilization, the left has captured the commanding heights of culture, whether it's universities, whether it's the federal bureaucracy, whether it's NATO, whether it's National Public Radio, whether it's the National Institutes of Health. Everywhere across the high ground of Western culture, the left has been ascendant for 30 years. And what MAGA perceives itself as doing is waging cultural guerrilla warfare against that terrain. And so the point is not the policy. And candidly, the point is actually not even the politics. The point is the culture war. That is what they want. That's why they hit the universities. That's why they hit the scientists. That's why they hit NATO, is they feel like they have to rip down these edifices that the left have constructed. And once you understand, I think, that theme, it starts to become more clear how we have to respond as a Democratic Party.
So you're describing neoliberalism, which ultimately is the barometer would suggest that is the normal position for most westernized countries, to believe in a woman's right to choose, for example, and to enable free speech in the media, something we're not really seeing so much of now. And yet it has been politicized to be called this kind of liberal thinking here in the US, whereas elsewhere, certainly in my experience in Europe, it is just considered normal, and it's the far right that were the exception.
Those of us, and I count myself in this camp, who are John Stuart Mill liberals, in the sense of believing in the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, and that the power of the state must be constrained so that individuals can pursue their happiness unencumbered. I think we have to recognize the challenge and the imminent threat of authoritarianism from the hard right in this country. We also have to recognize, though, Anthony, illiberalism on the left, because the cancel culture that you see at universities, I think the increasing distrust of institutions or a reflexive attitude against people who disagree with you, that happens on the left as well. And for us to have credibility, we have to be willing to call out both sides.
But is it the cancel culture, or is it the right's description of cancel culture? Because, for example, the trans athletes issue, there's like 11 trans people seeking to play in league sports in this way. 11. And so yet it has become the largest section of their propaganda leading into the last election.
Agree with you that they are pretextual in how they engage on issues, and that, focusing on locker rooms and bathrooms instead of talking about classrooms at a time when half of American kids are behind grade level on reading and writing is just a monumental failure of political focus. It is also true that Princeton University just had an incident where a huge number of students shouted down a visiting speaker because they disagreed with what that visiting speaker had to say. That's not acceptable. That's not how we teach the next generation of Americans to engage in civil discourse. So we've got to be able to call balls and strikes on both sides.
Let's talk about a subject that kind of crosses both of these issues, from healthcare to tariffs. And that is what Trump said. Kind of nobody really listened to this the other day when he was at the Republican National Dinner, dressed as a penguin. He said that, we're going to be tariffing pharmaceuticals next.
Yes.
And this worried me greatly because, even in my own family, we have a lot of problems getting access to pharmaceuticals for various chronic illnesses. And if the tariffs were to extend to that as well, that would mean that the average American would struggle to often stay alive with some of the drugs and the drug pricing. What were your thoughts on that?
90% of prescribed drugs are generics, and the generic drug industry in particular is highly sensitive to either uncertainty about or the actual imposition of tariffs. If he treats tariffs on pharmaceuticals with the same innumeracy and incompetence that he's treated tariffs on everything else, there is absolutely going to be price increases and potentially shortages of generic drugs. And
even, Joe Biden's policy of capping insulin at $35, which, did amazing things for people. But we're seeing so many of these policies reversed by this Trump regime. I mean, I was reading only this morning about banking fees, capping overdrafts at $5 fees, just scrapping all of that stuff. It seems a lot easier, or it is a lot easier to scrap policies than it is to come up with new ones. And, Trump boasts about how much he's done in his first 2 months. But everything he's done has basically been shutting things down.
It's policy vandalism. That's right. It's easier to deface and destroy something than it is to do the painful bipartisan work of building something up. I'll give you another example of that, staying on the theme of pharmaceuticals. At the end of last Congress, we had bipartisan legislation crafted on pharmacy benefit managers. These are the middlemen of drug pricing owned by the health insurance giants, and they mark up the price of drugs for leukemia, for multiple sclerosis, for HIV by thousands of dollars. We had bipartisan legislation that was going to rein in some of their abusive practices, that was going to save taxpayers money, particularly through Medicaid, and that was going to cap copays for individuals at the pharmacy counter. Lower copays for individuals. Elon Musk tweeted about that legislation, said he didn't like it. 12 hours later, Mike Johnson pulls the bill from the floor. And for the next 3 months in this next Congress, on the Committee of Jurisdiction, we have been trying to get Republicans to bring back up this bipartisan legislation. In fact, just last week, we introduced an amendment to another bill saying, let's just vote on this thing that you already agreed to. Let's just do it right now. The only people in America who disagree with this legislation is the CEO of United Health Group. Everyone else loves it. Republicans blocked it. Wouldn't do it because they were too afraid of the dear leader, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, of course, an unelected bureaucrat who seems to have taken over the running of the federal government, it seems, or the cutting of the federal government. Maybe we could talk about him and the tech bros just for a moment, seeing as you kind of mentioned them earlier. This is originally it was a conspiracy, the idea that these kind of tech billionaires wanted to take over the world and take over the governance of the US. But actually, when you dig into the weeds of it, that kind of seems to be like the trajectory that we're actually on.
I'm glad you raised this. Let's address this two ways. First, Doge itself, which is a tissue of lies being spun in front of the American public. Because one, they're making claims about fraud, waste, and abuse in Social Security that are simply unfounded. And two, they are conflating the idea of cost cutting with the idea of efficiency. Efficiency is about return on investment. So when they, for example, fire all the journalists who work at Radio Free Asia, whose only job is to try to help countries like Cambodia or Vietnam have independent news to counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, are they saving the government money? Yeah, I guess. The salaries are no longer coming out of the Treasury. Is that a good return on investment? That the United States has no counterweight ideologically to the CCP in Southeast Asia, one of the fastest growing regions in the world? No, of course not. But they're not doing the careful work of explaining to the American people the difference between cost and return on investment. When they gut USAID, that's going to prevent 200,000 kids from developing paralysis from polio in the next year. Does that technically save money from the U.S. Treasury? Again, yeah, I suppose it does. Is that a good return on investment? No, it's ludicrous. And so they're lying about both direct claims. They're lying about what actually it means for the government to be efficient. And behind this, as you indicated, is an ideology that is actually not small d democratic. Forget about big D democratic. It's not small d democratic. Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, and their host of Silicon Valley intellectuals believe that America would be better run under a form of governance that has been called aristopopulism, where the elites sort of have a benevolent rule over the common man.
Pseudo-intellectualism. I thought I'd just correct you on that because I've listened to Peter Thiel's speeches and the like. And
Curtis Yarvin, absolutely.
Right. I mean,
Yes.
they're very convincing.
Patrick Mean.
They don't make an awful lot of sense. And
It's
you could
important, though, for us to listen because we have to be very clear about what they are trying to do.
Yes.
They actually fundamentally don't think that what the framers drafted in the Constitution is the best form of government for the United States. They think that, as Patrick Deneen has said, that actually the ancient Greeks pre-democracy had it right when it was the elites sort of patronizing and governing on behalf of the common people.
And they all have vested interests. They have government contracts. I mean, Peter Thiel's government contract is it's very serious, isn't it? I mean, the software, the business that he has is directly involved in the US military. It's now moving into immigration. They're using his algorithms to check people's status.
without doubt.
It's all
Candidly,
intertwined.
I'm more worried about Musk's contacts with the Chinese government than I am even with the American government.
But Trump admitted that the other day,
Yes.
didn't he? He actually literally admitted that Musk has got an interest, obviously, in China, and so he needs to be a little bit careful. I mean, he says all the quiet parts out loud.
And I think the element of this that we all have to be cognizant of is when Donald Trump took office, one of the first things he did, and it flew under the radar, was issue a meme coin in his name, the Trump coin.
Right.
The media treated that as a marketing ploy. It wasn't actually. It was a monetization of the presidency. What it allowed individuals, foreign actors, businesses to do is to anonymously and confidentially purchase a share in Donald Trump's net worth in a way that no outside entity would be aware of except for Donald Trump himself. That's how a crypto wallet works. They can come and show him the crypto wallet. So let me ask you a question. If you're the board of directors for TikTok and Donald Trump holds sway over a deal that is worth literally hundreds of billions of dollars to you, or if you're Turkey and Donald Trump holds sway over military sales that are worth tens of billions of dollars to you, do you think that you would buy the Trump coin to have some influence over a man who is famously transactional?
I mean, I thought the same about DJT Media, that the fact that he even has a publicly trading company that people can buy shares of is also currying favor.
The man has been bought by foreign interests. Musk, I mean, we can at least trace the contracts that Musk has with the Chinese. Donald Trump has invisible contracts with foreign actors.
And the bait and switch that he does is, I'm not taking a presidential salary. And yet he is making millions and billions through even just leasing when he travels to his own properties. He's charging the public effectively for not just his travel, but also his stay and the stay of his Secret Service, staying in his own properties. I mean, there doesn't seem to be enough coverage of the corruption that is going on at that level.
Especially since they have campaigned, particularly RFK, but really the broader Trump sphere on this anti-corrupt self-righteousness. I agree with you that hypocrisy needs to be brought to light. And yet, Anthony, Democrats also need to do a better job of explaining what we are for. Americans do know that we are against Donald Trump. That has come through over the last decade.
Yeah.
Democrats also have to have an agenda about what we are going to do should voters entrust us with power. Because in my view, voters give power to the individual or to the party about whom they know what they're going to do with that power. And I don't think Democrats have explained that sufficiently.
You alluded to this in your Time interview, the idea that Democrats need to be talking about much kind of bigger issues and have more clarity about the offering. That we know about the power vacuum. We know that there's people are really struggling, reaching out for some kind of leadership on the left. What in the short term, what is the solution? I mean, does Chuck Schumer need to step aside? I mean, is it as simple as that?
I think we should not fixate on individuals. I don't think we should fixate on individuals in Congress. I don't think we should fixate on individuals who might be presidential candidates. The forest of political ambition is large, and I have no doubt that the next generation will emerge in various forms. What the party is short of is ideas. We need to go out there and say, hey, we have ideas for how to build in this country again. We're going to build 7 million units of housing. We're going to build 5 Hoover Dams worth of nuclear energy. We're going to build 1,000 tech-voc high schools. We're going to build more ships in the Chinese Navy. And we're going to break one thing. We're going to break the social media corporations that have been attention fracking our kids for the last 20 years and who have gotten away scot-free from the United States Congress without a single piece of legislation passed to hold them accountable to their users or to force them to pay taxes to the U.S. Treasury.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the tariffs and the effect on the U.S. economy and on people's 401ks and everything that goes with that. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. There's a lot happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or hopeless when things are outside of our control. But Calm can help you restore your sense of balance amidst outside chaos. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone faces challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't about a cookie-cutter approach. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. including meditation, sleep stories, sleep meditation, calming music, grounding exercises, and expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and much more. Calm puts the tools that you need in your pocket and helps you dedicate a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners to the show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/weekend. Go to calm.com/weekend for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/weekend. We're back with Congressman Jake Auchincloss here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. So it was the 2nd of April when, was it Liberation Day or something? He called it the great announcement that these tariffs would be present, and he had this chart which Howard Lutnick gave him, and it looked like they made it in a kindergarten class together. And it basically had a formula for these reciprocal tariffs against the rest of the world. Why is it that Donald Trump hasn't grasped what free trade is and the value of free trade, or even international trade on any level, even with tariffs? He doesn't seem to understand the math of it. But this idea that other countries have been ripping us off for decades, and this is the retribution. I mean, what is all that about?
Donald Trump's only consistent policy over his career has been his infatuation with tariffs. Since the 1980s, he has pitched tariffs as the silver bullet for all that ails America. At first, it was against the Japanese, and now it's against everyone. And it's because he fundamentally has a zero-sum view of economic growth. He thinks if someone else is doing well, then we must be doing worse. That's his view on immigration. That's his view on trade. That's his view on his own business dealings when he was in the private sector, where everything had to go through litigation because someone had to lose, someone had to win. And he's now taking that self-defeating, self-contracting, zero-sum approach to our economy. I served for 2 years last term on the Select Committee on China, where in a bipartisan format, we dug deep into long-term competition with the Chinese Communist Party. And I can tell you, there is absolutely a role for tariffs in American economic competitiveness, particularly tariffs on China. The way that this man has rolled tariffs out has provided China a massive opening. This is going to drive the world's two biggest economies, China and Europe's, together to the detriment of the United States. It is raising prices for the American middle class. It is cratering their 401ks, and it is not going to have the reindustrialization benefits that he is promising, because it is so volatile and uncertain that no businesses or investors can actually put capital behind his promises.
There's also a theory that he wants to eradicate income tax altogether, and this has always been his thing. And by trying to shift deflect the attention over to tariffs and to other countries, that then he can, we know he wants to reduce corporation tax for the richest people significantly. And this is all kind of leading up to that. It's so that he can claim that there's revenue coming from elsewhere. But we do need to keep pushing home the point that it is consumers, American consumers and importers, that will be paying these taxes. It really has nothing to do with these other countries.
It's the largest tax hike in peacetime history in the United States. Hundreds of billions of dollars in added prices for Americans. It is also going to raise costs for businesses. I think sometimes people think of trade only as about exports, markets for exports. Trade is also about cheaper imports, and businesses rely on cheaper imports in order to be able to produce finished goods for American consumers. I was just talking, for example, to a manufacturer in my own district yesterday who was saying that everything that he relies on to make textiles is about to get a lot more expensive. So this is just a price hike on everybody.
This goes back to the tech bros, though, doesn't it? They don't want income tax. They don't think that income tax works, if you look at their manifesto. And so is this kind of, again, playing into that kind of oligarchy?
It is, although it's also exposing a pretty big divide in Trump world, in that people like Musk are more oriented towards trade and immigration, whereas the true MAGA diehards, the ones that I think Musk views as basically kind of convenient pawns in his worldview, they are much more protectionist by nature, and that applies both to trade and to immigration. So there's a significant divide in their camp, and candidly, that's one of the reasons why he backed off. The other reason, of course, is that the bond markets called his bluff. I think it's worth driving home how embarrassing that was. So the U.S. 10-year Treasury market is the definition of stability in the global financial system. When things get shaky anywhere in the world, investors rally to the 10-year Treasury, and you see, prices go down, yields go up. And what happened instead over this last week is the opposite. And that was a major set of alarm bells to the Treasury Secretary and to the White House, because what it told them was, frankly, the rest of the world was short America. What that did is it took away leverage from Donald Trump as he negotiates with China on the terms of trade. Because now China's looking at him, they're being like, hey man, you tried to walk tall and beat your chest, and your own investors in your own treasuries called you out on it. We didn't have to do anything yet.
Also, Trump fails to realize that trade, and especially free trade, is what protects us from kind of military conflict. It's the other thing that balances out the fact that we're able to maintain communications with our foes. And
That's
so
right.
Without having a strong trading relationship, that's when the enemy becomes more dangerous, right?
Without doubt. The Pax Americana, which has basically been the system of freedom of navigation, and the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, and multilateral alliances, particularly NATO, since World War II, has enabled peace and prosperity to spread to ever more people for the last 70 years. The most peaceful time in human history, the time of the highest rise in living standards in human history. Has it been perfect? Of course not. Has America made mistakes? Of course we have. But overall, it has been a system more conducive to human flourishing than any other. And he's taken a chainsaw to it. And ultimately, as I said, what it's going to do is it's going to cause Europe to turn closer to China. And that is going to make Americans less safe and less prosperous. It also is going to, go ahead, Anthony.
Well, I was going to say in the process of Europe and China connecting, it seems that Trump is positioning himself closer to Vladimir Putin and Russia.
That's right.
And so these alliances that we have, enjoyed the safety and comfort of since the Second World War now are changing direction, and that is very worrying for the people who study this stuff.
It is shocking. The resonance between MAGA, Christian nationalism, and Vladimir Putin's revanchism and Orthodox Christianity, traditionalism, the resonance between those two threads is real, and they're intertwined. Much of the MAGA base is fundamentally sympathetic to the idea that Ukraine should not exist as a country, and that Russia has a right to Kiev as a matter of civilizational primacy. And that is really contrary to a rules-based international order. That is contrary to the way that the United States has operated, at least since World War II, that has made us all safer. And the problem is, one of the problems, is that unlike what the MAGA apologists are saying, it does not help wedge Russia from China. That's what they're claiming. They're saying, oh, yeah, we're getting closer to Russia, but what really this is going to do is a reverse Nixon, and we're going to peel Russia away from China, and it's going to make China weaker. Nonsense. Xi Jinping is watching this, and he's laughing. He's saying, oh my goodness, they are giving me exactly the premise I need to assert Chinese dominance and aggression throughout the Indo-Pacific.
So much for the art of the deal. I mean, USAID shutting that down started this off, really, didn't it? It gave China the opportunity to step in to influence nations that the US was maintaining control of from a distance. Do you think that kind of short-term failure to see the long-term effects of shutting down USAID? I mean, I think he just read it as US aid and didn't want to give foreign aid. I think that was as far as it went. He didn't understand about how influence on the world stage happens on a diplomatic level. I mean, we've seen how he does diplomacy. We saw that in the Oval Office with Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, it's disgusting. So, there's so much to this, and yet Trump really doesn't have enough gray cells to get his head around it.
No, and it's, as we were discussed earlier, it's not even really about the policy or the politics of USAID. It's cultural. Their view is that USAID is yet another institution of the West that has been captured by the left, and thereby it has to be destroyed. And they're not all that interested in the cost benefit analysis, which,
and African nations, brown people are the ones who benefit, and why should we be, sending money there?
Speaking of which, I mean, what's the fastest growing country in the world? Nigeria. It's going to have probably the third largest population in the world by 2050. Half their population right now is under 18. So this is a young, dynamic, entrepreneurial, already a net exporter of music and culture in the region. We should be doing everything we can to get close to Nigeria, to build stronger economic and cultural ties. What do we do instead? We undermine their public health and their infrastructure by canceling not just USAID, but also the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
And there's no further proof that we need that Trump and Musk have been having conversations about this. We know about Musk's youth growing up in apartheid South Africa. They're now giving white African farmers the opportunity to come to the United States and fast track the visa process. I mean, this was an announcement that came shortly after the closure of USAID. I mean, it really is one rule for the black people and another rule for the white people.
Their conception of visas is broken on a really fundamental level. You got Trump talking about, the gold card, which strikes me as like a way for Russian oligarchs to come play golf with him. And at the same time, basically making it harder to get H-1Bs, which are arguably the single greatest driver of innovation in the American economy, where high-skilled immigrants come. We recently had a hearing with Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and he and I were talking about the seminal paper of 2017 called Attention is All You Need that Google researchers published. It is considered the paper that launched the AI revolution that we've seen over the last few years. Of those 8 authors of that paper, 7 of them are immigrants. And the 8th is the grandson of refugees. Under a Donald Trump regime, those kinds of people don't come here. They don't study here. They don't invent here. They don't start businesses here. They do it in China. They do it in India. They do it in countries where we don't get to reap all the benefits.
There is the fear that the educated will undermine Donald Trump and this new kind of far-right Project 2025 movement. And so clearly that is part of the long-term goal of eradicating the Department of Education and just reducing the chances that anybody might speak up and say, well, actually, no, this isn't right, or there's research that suggests that you're wrong. So
I'm glad you raised this idea of what does opposition look like when we're dealing with a creeping authoritarian. And to me, it is really two elements. One is that you need solidarity amongst the institutions of society. So you need media outlets and the big law firms and business executives and journalists and opinion makers to all be sort of locking arms together and understanding that it's all for one and one for all. You cannot have law firms cutting side deals. You cannot have business executives staying silent when he guts their regulators or trying to cut side deals with him. You've got to have solidarity there. And then second, you've got to empower that solidarity with massed public pressure, with rallies, particularly in congressional districts, with moderate Republicans who are, on the fence on some of these issues, so that we can take the energy of the public pressure and put it behind the solidarity of critical American institutions.
Let's wrap up the tariffs conversation for a second, because we didn't mention the reversal of course that happened exactly 7 days later. What was it? I mean, you mentioned the bond markets, but What was that thing that made Donald Trump retreat? I mean, this was a backtrack, and even though Caroline Leavitt was saying, he had this planned all along and this is what we were going to do. And even Donald Trump posted on Truth Social at 9:00 in the morning, a great day to buy, suggesting people should buy stocks. 4 hours later, the announcement came that they were basically stopping this entire policy, apart from maintaining the 10% tax levy.
Yes.
This is insider trading, isn't it?
I mean, probably. The keeping track of the self-dealing within the Trump administration on every given issue is a job unto itself. You asked, what caused this? Mm-hmm. And it's actually an example of what I was just describing of how to do opposition when we're in the minority as Democrats, which is to say, what do we see? One, we saw public pressure. You saw public pressure in the sense of significant constituent outreach to congressional Republicans saying, my 401k just cratered, saying, I am a small business owner who's looking at layoffs because of these tariffs. What is going on? That matters. That does percolate through to pressure from Republicans onto the White House. But then you also saw some institutions actually kind of do their jobs a little bit, particularly the bond market and the business community, in the sense that the bond market called the president's bluff and said, particularly when they had the Treasury auction, we're short America right now. We're not buying what you're selling. And second, that business executives were blowing up the White House saying, this is terrible for America Incorporated.
And even some Republican senators were. I mean, Rand Paul made a whole speech about it. And, for some of us, it was the first time in our lives we'd ever agreed with Rand Paul on anything.
But here's the challenge I would give to America broadly, to the public, to leaders of American institutions is, yes, we got to do it when it's about money. We also got to do it when it's about a man in Maryland who is wrongfully deported to El Salvador and deprived habeas corpus and due process. We got to do it when it's not as immediately popular or doesn't feel as urgent, because that attack on due process is every bit as dangerous. Indeed, I would argue more so than his reckless use of tariffs.
Let's talk about that, because, it does feel to me that Trump is trying to make the U.S. more like Russia every day. He obviously idolizes Vladimir Putin and looks up to him. And people talk about what is the compromise. I don't believe there really needs to be any. We only have to look at Trump's character and how he kind of, even the way he looks up to Elon Musk because of his great riches, I guess. But this idea, you mentioned these deportations and Mahmoud Khalil, for example, who was just a peaceful protester protesting and supporting the Palestinians, and yet they accused him of supporting Hamas. There is a distinction here, and this is something that the Trump administration doesn't seem to care for at all. And every day we're hearing about more and more draconian policies referencing laws from hundreds of years ago, the Alien Enemies Act, for example, to try and just get anybody out who doesn't look like Trump.
Let's set aside the facts and even the law for a moment. We can talk about the fact pattern from Mahmoud Khalil. We can talk about the Immigration and Nationalization Act, Alien Sedition Act. There's actually something, to me, even more fundamental that predates even, 1790s legislation, goes all the way back to England, which is habeas corpus, which is the core concept that if the state accuses you of something, you get to stand in front of an impartial judge. You get to present your facts with counsel next to you, and you get to have a full and fair hearing before the state gets to use its awesome power against you to deprive you of your liberty or to take other coercive actions against you. That is, honestly, almost the fundamental fixture of American public life. And what he is doing is attacking due process, attacking habeas corpus for those who are most vulnerable in our society, which is always where these autocrats want to start, right? They're not going to start with famous U.S. citizens. They're going to start with immigrants, with people who they can have some pretext about why they don't deserve something or shouldn't be here. And unfortunately, you see MAGA Republicans echoing these talking points. Victoria Spartz, Republican of Indiana, is at a town hall saying, if you commit a crime, you don't get due process. That's a member of Congress, Anthony.
Yeah.
That is literally backwards, right? That is 180 degrees not what due process means. The whole point is, if you are alleged to commit a crime, you do get due process, because freedom is who we are. And freedom fundamentally means that nobody can take away your freedom unless they show the facts that you have violated community laws.
We've seen images posted on social media of Kristi Noem dressed in kind of military fatigues, pointing a gun in the wrong direction and claiming that, these migrants should be deported for life, and they shouldn't have any rights to come back. And in fact, just a handful of the 238 migrants that were taken or kidnapped effectively to this prison in El Salvador actually have, a handful of them have a criminal record. We were told they were dangerous criminals, and this whole rhetoric of getting these people out. Obviously, everybody wants to live in a safer country, but this is just racism, isn't it? It's pretty simple.
Everybody whose feet is on American soil gets due process. Everybody. No one's above the law in this country, not the president, and no one's below it either. Now, does the Secretary of State have expansive authorities over green card holders, over student visas, over undocumented immigrants? Yes, they do. Maybe we should look at those laws. Maybe those authorities are too expansive and are outdated. And I think that would be good bipartisan action for an era when Republicans are actually willing to buck the dear leader. But what is not up for debate is that you cannot be caught up in a dragnet operation without getting to stand in front of a judge. That is not up for debate in this country, and we have to stand firm on that principle.
Except they just managed to get a bill through Congress that tries to silence the voices of federal judges. I mean, this is the next level of authoritarianism as I see it. And even though it's pretty clear that it shouldn't pass the Senate, we are looking at this legislation that restricts federal judges from issuing opinions and directives that have immediate national consequences. I mean, how did we come to this?
The Trump administration does what it often does, which is to take a kernel of legitimate policy and to spin it out into a cruel, unproductive, even dangerous way. And what I mean by that is judge shopping for injunctions has become more of an issue over the last 20 years. Both sides have done it to a certain extent, where they look for friendly judges. They bring suits in friendly district court jurisdictions, and then it impairs national policy making.
Yeah, New York or Florida, you kind of pick your district.
You pick it. And okay, let's work on that. Let's figure out, and there's been a lot of thoughtful proposals from the Brennan Center and other places about how we work on that. That is not what this bill is. What this bill is about trying to hamper an independent and strong judiciary. And we need to be moving in the other direction. We should actually be strengthening the independence of the judiciary by making it easier for them to use the United States Marshal Service. And the U.S. Marshal Service is kind of like the cops that report directly to judges, to make it easier for them to use them to enforce their injunctions and their writs. So, for example, this man who was unlawfully deported to El Salvador, a judge should be able to say to the U.S. Marshal Service, go get him. Go to El Salvador and get this man because it was illegal and the administration is not listening.
Well, they were supposed to turn the planes around after a judge's order, and they refused to do that. I mean, that, for many of us commentating on it, was the moment we landed in a constitutional crisis. Would you agree with that?
It is certainly the beginnings of one. We're going to see how this plays out. I think you cannot call one moment a constitutional crisis. A constitutional crisis is what spins out over a series of actions and episodes. That's how January 6th happened as well, another constitutional crisis. But what is clear is that the argument that the administration gave to the judge is nonsensical. That you don't have authority over planes in midair. He said, no, I have authority over you though, and I'm telling you to make that phone call. I mean, it doesn't stand up to common sense, much less to law.
The acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, said that he would like the agency to implement a system of trucks that rounds up immigrants for deportation in a system similar to how Amazon delivers packages around the U.S. But instead of, doing it with parcels, you do it with human beings. This was reported by the Arizona Mirror. This kind of dehumanizing language, and we've heard it from Tom Homan as well, this kind of bruiser mentality where, he even said, I don't care what the courts say, I'm coming to get you. This is the language of Nazism. This is as far as it has now got. And for those of us who are minorities in this country, you feel it in a far more visceral way than, say, white, male, Christian, Trump-supporting citizens.
I can tell you as a Jew who represents a large Jewish community, I understand that point viscerally because Jews intuit that dehumanizing language against people is a step on a very ugly road, and that the core promise of America is the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, that they are vested with inalienable rights simply because they are human, and that the circumstances of your birth should not determine the condition of your life. And that applies to immigrants as well. Do we need a secure border? Of course we do. Was it acceptable to have 5 million people cross the border without any documentation over the 4 years, or the 2 years, that started the Biden administration? No, that was a mistake. That does not mean, though, that we dehumanize new arrivals. And it also, I should note, would have devastating economic consequences, because the construction sector, the home care and healthcare sectors, the retail and tourism sectors, heavily dependent on immigration, and deporting these individuals at a time when we are also raising prices because of tariffs is going to be a double whammy that could tip us into a recession with higher prices.
Not to mention the tax contributions as well of immigrants. Huge.
Immigrants add $20 billion to undocumented immigrants, add
right.
I think $20 billion to Social Security every year. That's right.
What do you make of this argument that the Trump regime is currently saying that, oh, well, if we bring manufacturing back to the US, that Americans will want to do these jobs, screwing the tiny screws into iPhones and working on these factory lines? I mean, there seems to be a total misunderstanding of how industry is changing, the way that automation is taking over in so many ways. Again, by not having or referencing any research and it all being anecdotal, they make a good argument on television, but in reality, it just doesn't add up.
Having a strong manufacturing and industrial base is important to any country, the United States included. The hollowing out of parts of our industrial base has been damaging, not just to, I think, our economic readiness, but also to community cohesion in parts of this country, where when jobs go away, family structure goes away as well. So we have to recognize that. We also, though, and here's where I disagree, frankly, with members of both parties, that politicians in Washington cannot predict what jobs 10 years from now look like. And every time that we try, we're wrong. The jobs 10 years from now are not going to look like the jobs 25 years ago. And if we roll out a series of policies that claim to predict and prescribe how those jobs are going to be, it's hubristic, and it's going to take us down a path where ultimately we're going to cause pain for no long-term gain. I'll give you an example of that. The National Security Commission, on emerging biotechnology, just released a bipartisan report about the bioeconomy, basically using biology to build things, whether it's chemicals or industrials or materials or pharmaceuticals or agriculture and food. And it's a huge opportunity, massive, trillions of dollars, hundreds of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs. But we don't know exactly what those jobs are going to look like. We can't. What we can do is invest in research and development. We can invest in the kinds of education and skills acquisition opportunities that allow people to be ready for those jobs. We can create reasonable regulations so that businesses and investors know how to help create this economy. But we cannot prescribe what those jobs will be, and we shouldn't pretend that we can. It's inauthentic.
We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk to you about Social Security. We're looking at hearing that being potentially gutted, certainly Medicaid and Medicare too. And I also want to talk about the future for the Democratic Party. We'll do that with you next here on The Weekend Show. 420 is around the corner, and there's no better time to elevate your wellness routine, whether you want to relax, recharge, or refocus. Via has the perfect lineup for you. If you haven't tried them yet, you're seriously missing out. Whether you need to unwind, refocus, or boost your mood, Via is here to enhance your everyday and night. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is changing the game in natural wellness, blending powerful, high-quality hemp-derived ingredients to deliver real, effect-driven benefits. Whether you're looking to sleep better, have a better libido, improve focus, or simply relax, Via has a tailored solution just for you. And the best part, Via legally ships across the USA. Discreet, direct to your door, no medical card required, and backed by a worry-free guarantee. Not sure where to start? Take Via's Product Finder quiz. Get personalized recommendations tailored to your needs. It takes less than 60 seconds to complete. So, if you're 21 plus, treat yourself to Via's annual Spring 420 sale, Black Friday level savings of up to 35% site-wide right now, and up to 50% off packs and bundles. And get a free gift and more savings with your first order using our exclusive code WEEKEND. Find the link in the description below. And enjoy free shipping on orders over $100. That's code WEEKEND. The link is in the description. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via. We're back on the weekend show with Congressman Jake Auchincloss. I'm Anthony Davis. We heard Mike Johnson making some excuses a couple of days ago as to why they need to investigate the Medicare and Social Security and start, running algorithms, I think he said, to look at all of the fraud and the waste and the abuse of these services. The reality is, because there is data on this, that any kind of abuse is minuscule. And this is an excuse, once again, to dismantle these essential services that people rely on to live. Are you as worried about that as many people are?
Social Security is not just the most important and most popular anti-poverty program for elders in America. It is also the most important anti-poverty program for children in America. So I am deeply committed to protecting the integrity and the solvency of Social Security. They're trying to close a Social Security office in my district as we speak, and we're going to fight that tooth and nail. And the reason why Musk's lies about Social Security fraud are so concerning is that I think they are the pretext to try to privatize Social Security. The Republicans tried to do this under George W. Bush. Democrats fought them off. I think they're going to try to do it. Musk and Howard Lutnick and Senator Rick Scott from Florida, who's already proposed this. They're going to try to say, oh, there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security that the only thing we can do is turn it over to the private sector so they can run it like a business. And we're not going to let that happen because there's not a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security. It's a well-run program. And we are not going to allow Musk and his cronies to get their hands on what is a contract between Americans that must be honored.
The theme with this regime is create a problem and then claim to be the only ones able to fix it. So we're hearing that with Social Security. We're hearing that with immigration. The SAVE Act has just passed Congress. This is also very concerning. Trump did an executive order that was basically a similar thing a couple of weeks ago. They're trying a two-pronged attempt to create a policy that makes voting or even registering to vote much, much harder, especially for women who might have changed their name through marriage, requiring an increased number of documents, passports, birth certificates, to prove that you are who you are. And they claim that this is to prevent immigrants from voting. Well, immigrants can't vote and don't vote, but they're kind of ignoring that fact, aren't they? How serious is the SAVE Act? And this is voter suppression as I see it, because this could be the thing that keeps Republicans in power forever unless something is done about it.
As you indicated, non-citizen voting in federal elections is already illegal, already punishable under law. It's also vanishingly rare, not a widespread problem by any means. And it's hypocritical for Republicans to try to lecture the rest of the country on the integrity of our electoral system. When I watched these individuals on January 6, 2021, step over broken glass in the chamber to vote against the free and fair election of Joe Biden after an insurrection had just been levied in the Capitol. These individuals have no credibility on protecting the core tenets of a peaceful transfer of power.
There's been a lot of talk about the 2024 election and how it was voter suppression in multiple districts that gave Donald Trump the win. And whilst and there are various companies that are still trying to kind of recount and add things up and see how many people were disenfranchised, how many people who had their votes purged, and how the huge disinformation campaign gave Trump the win, if not the mandate that he claims?
Well, Anthony, here we got to diverge. I think Democrats engaging in that type of thinking is putting our head into the sand about what happened. And David Shore, a noted public opinion researcher and strategist, actually has done some pretty compelling research that indicates that if every single individual who hadn't voted in the election in 24 had voted, Trump's margin would actually have been bigger. And I put that forward because Democrats need to own the fact that as reprehensible as Donald Trump is, and as unpopular as he is, and he is very unpopular, he has never been popular with the American public, we did lose to him. And as we talked about earlier, we lost to him because I don't think Americans know what we're for. They know what we're against, for sure, but they do not have confidence in what we are going to do if we control Congress and we control the presidency.
So let's talk to that for a moment, because Democrats are representing such a huge range of views. And for me, this is really the problem, isn't it? The Republicans, you can kind of narrow down their opinions on things and maybe count them on one hand. But Democratic views and liberal views are vast and wide-ranging. So it is hard to manage a party and have the correct messaging for a party that is so diverse. So where would you suggest that Democrats need to go with their messaging to kind of bring clarity to the offering?
I agree that our party can be a cacophony of voices. I don't actually think that's really a liability. That is part of who we are as a party, is a lot of people who care about policy and want to debate those ideas. And sometimes, in fact, I think our problem is a little bit of the opposite, which is that we impose an ideological straitjacket upon ourselves with this idea of, we need message unity. And what that does is it sometimes makes the ideas go stale because we're afraid to debate them in the public. Actually, I think debating ideas in the public and, yes, disagreeing can be galvanizing to the electorate. And people say, I like that you're putting that out there. I don't think I fully agree with it, but you're thinking differently. Of course, there comes a time when there's a nominee for the party, right? They win the presidential primary. There's a standard bearer, and we rally around that individual. We say, this is the horse that we are riding, and we're going to all do our part. That has to happen. But we got 3 years between now and then. And I think we should be debating ideas. I see at least 3 themes across what these ideas can be. Number one, I think, is a build America theme. We got to build housing. We got to build clean energy. We got to build technical vocational schools. We got to build ships in this country. We got to show Americans that we can build again. One, to mobilize our industrial base, but 2, to lower costs, particularly in housing, which is the largest cost in a family's budget. Number 2, I think we have to win back the trust of the American people on law and order, whether because of border security issues or because of crime or quality of life issues in many of our cities. Americans don't think that we're the party that will uphold the rule of law. We have to strictly uphold the rule of law, defending due process and holding criminals to account. And then finally, we got to be willing to take on corporate capture in Washington, D.C. The health insurance corporations, the social media corporations, they have had the run of show in Washington for decades now. They've become Fortune 20 companies because of it, but they're not serving Americans well, and we have to battle them.
Would it be fair to suggest that shaking things up in terms of the protocols for leadership might be a good idea? I mean, I know this week Jamie Raskin was holding some shadow committee hearings, which is very helpful. It's not really been done before in this way, but because Republicans won't do it, it seems necessary to hold these committee hearings, even though they don't have much power. But what about even going as far as to bring new leadership in, or even suggest somebody kind of leads the charge? Because we know we have Hakeem Jeffries in the House, and we have Chuck Schumer in the Senate. But would it be better to kind of bring forward this presidential candidate just so that there is an individual or a group that is really fighting Donald Trump head to head?
No. And I understand the British perspective of a shadow cabinet and a prime minister in waiting. I appreciate that. But 2028 will be the first time in 20 years where the Democrats have had an open primary, right? Since 2008, since Obama emerged. And I think if we right now pull forward this party debate and pull forward the primary process and anoint a standard bearer, we deprive ourselves of a really important opportunity to debate big ideas. I mean, imagine if in 2005, the party had said, we're going to choose who it is. It probably wouldn't have been Barack Obama, right? And that would have been a lost opportunity for us. I am here for a big, brawling, intra-party discussion and debate about big ideas, understanding that we are going to be united in defending this country against Donald Trump, and understanding that whoever ultimately holds the standard in 2028 after the presidential primary, we're going to rally behind that individual.
There is a fear that people have that Trump will find an excuse not to hold elections, extended war powers, attack Iran and say, it's can't happen right now. I mean, he accused Vladimir Zelensky of not holding elections. And there have been examples, Churchill during the Second World War as well. But, is that a concern? Because, then we really are kind of crossing a dictatorial line, aren't we?
I mean, everything to do with Donald Trump and the transfer of power is a concern. We saw what happened in 2020. We would be foolish to assume that he's ever going to do the right thing when it comes to handing over power. He certainly hasn't before. And so it's an example of why America's federal structure, though, can be a source of strength. As you know, Anthony, the national government doesn't run elections in America. The states do. And the states send electors to the Electoral College for the presidency. And so the states themselves are the ones who are running this process. And actually, we strengthened that process after January 6th through the Electoral Count Reform Act, which was a bipartisan victory early in Joe Biden's term that provided even more resilience to this federal system of elections to prevent someone like Donald Trump from trying to steal it.
Finally, I want to ask you about a subject that doesn't get much traction in the US. The Europeans are running around dealing with this all the time, and that is climate change. Trump held a press conference with a bunch of coal miners the other day and suggested that coal, clean coal, beautiful clean coal, he likes to call it, is the future of America's energy generation. I mean, the reality is that whilst we're having these conversations about policies and politics on the ground, the planet is burning, the wildfires are raging, and yet there is zero interest from the Trump administration to deal with any of it. They're shutting down the EPA and any climate policies that Joe Biden brought about. How important is it that we bring this subject back into the public forum? And is it a vote winner for Democrats?
In my first term, we passed the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy investment in history, which has helped the United States advance towards a clean energy economy. And we've got to, protect those wins, particularly the investment and production tax credits that help things like geothermal and offshore wind and solar and battery storage advance. But then we also need to be looking at new ways to reach 1.7 degrees by 2050 and to help reindustrialize the United States. I'll point to three. One is nuclear power. And here, frankly, I disagree with elements of my own party. Nuclear power is affordable, reliable, safe. We got to get better at building it as a country. It costs way too much and takes way too long, but it's something that with experience doing projects like the French have, you can get better at, particularly in a modular form. We should try to build 5 Hoover Dams worth of nuclear energy by 2030.
And there's some great technology with waste that I've been reading about in Europe.
Totally.
The way that
the Finns, the Norwegians have figured this out already. Yeah. These are solved problems. It's a political problem more than a technical one. We just got to go ahead and do this thing. Geothermal is a bipartisan clean energy solution. You're drilling, but you're also getting baseload renewable power. And so the Republicans love to drill. Democrats like that it's clean. I got a bipartisan bill in the works to do that. Let's pursue geothermal. And then also we recognize that natural gas is going to be a bridge energy source for us. And if we can address the methane leaks from natural gas, you can go a long way towards remediating its environmental impact. So let's get a methane win on natural gas while we're using it still to ensure that Americans have the power they need.
Do you think Republicans really believe that climate change is a hoax, or is it just a convenient excuse to keep getting that support and those donations from the fossil fuel industries?
I don't think they're homogenous. It's kind of like MAGA more broadly. What I tend to think as I look across the aisle is it's about a third. There's sort of on any given MAGA issue, it's like there's a third who drank the Kool-Aid. There's a third who disagree, but they don't want to get a primary challenge. And there's a third who just want to keep their heads down and do whatever the dear leader wants.
Because that is the issue, isn't it? All of these things that we've discussed could be saved and fixed if Republicans in Congress grew a backbone. And
not even all of them. I mean, I don't even need all of them to have a backbone.
You need a couple of dozen, right?
Yeah, we literally just need, I don't know, somewhere between, on a given issue, like somewhere between 5 to 60, depending on if we have to override a veto, right, which is not even a plurality of their conference.
And how frustrating is that for you, walking the halls of Congress, knowing that there is this kind of authoritarian pressure over half of these legislators? Because I hear that some of them actually are frightened for their lives. They fear retribution from Trump's private militia if they step out of line.
Without doubt, they're either. I believe them that they are at times afraid for their own personal safety, and they're certainly all afraid of their political future. And it underscores why we need root electoral reform in this country. One of the core challenges we have is that of the 435 members of the House of Representatives, only about 35 face a competitive general election. 400 are oriented towards their primary. And what that means is they're oriented towards ideologically intense voters on the 20-yard line of public opinion, not the 50-yard line of public opinion. We can fix that. That is a known problem, and that is a problem that states have already started to fix. California, Alaska, New Jersey in various ways have addressed this issue. And by banning gerrymandering and by banning partisan primaries, we could get to a place where politicians are not, if they're Republicans, are not just worried about their MAGA base, they actually have to care about the median voter.
And we're starting to see a shift there, aren't we, with people who obviously voted for Trump and are starting to have regret about that because they're seeing either they were federal workers and they've lost their own jobs, or they've seen their 401k drop, or they're worried about these policies that will change their lives unrecognizably. Will there be enough of them, do you think, that could kind of cross back over?
Yes, there could be, but it's on Democrats to earn back those votes, both in the midterms and then in 2028. We should not presume anything. I know there's a narrative out there that, the electorate is thermostatic, right? The Republicans have the trifecta, so Democrats will be presumed to take back the House because the electorate always adjusts. I can tell you that House leadership, that Democrats in the caucus, we are not complacent about that. We feel like we have to go back out there and earn voters' trust on the economy, on law and order, on battling corruption and corporate capture in Washington. We need to have a positive agenda. Voters know that we are opposed to Donald Trump. They're clear on that. What are we going to do when we get power, though? That's the question that I think we have to bring home.
Okay. Well, I am grateful to you for your expertise, but also your optimism in these areas. It's certainly very helpful. For now, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
Anthony, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.